In 1901, sponge divers hiding from a storm off a bare Greek island dropped into the water and came up screaming. On the sea floor, 150 feet down, lay a field of bodies, bronze arms, marble faces, a wrecked ship that had been sitting there for 2,000 years. But the thing that would haunt the men who studied it wasn't the statues or the gold or the coins. It was a broken lump of rusted metal the size of a shoebox. Not a coin, not a buckle, not jewelry, but something with teeth cut into it. Gears, dozens of them. And once you understand what those gears actually did, you cannot look at the ancient world the same way again. Because here is the part that people who study this thing have never been able to make peace with. The gears inside that green lump of bronze should not exist. Not in 100 BC. Not for another 1400 years after that. Nothing else on Earth from that century comes close. No tool, no device, no machine anywhere from that time has that kind of exact work cut into metal by hand. And yet there it was, in a crate, in a museum, sitting quietly while everyone argued about the statues. To understand why a rusted lump of metal scares the history experts more than anything else pulled from that wreck, you have to go back to the moment it came out of the sea. And you have to understand that for the first 50 years, almost nobody believed it was real. It was the fall of 1900. A crew of Greek sponge divers, led by a man named Dimitrios Kontos, was working the waters near a small island called Antikythera, a scrap of rock stuck between Crete and the Greek mainland. They were not treasure hunters. They dove for sponges in heavy canvas suits and copper helmets, breathing air pumped down through a rubber hose. A storm had pushed them off course, and while they waited it out, one of the divers, a man named Elias Stadiatis, went down to check the sea floor. He came back up in a panic. He told the others he had seen a pile of rotting bodies and fallen horses spread across the bottom. The captain, not believing him, went down himself. What Stadiatis had seen were not bodies. They were statues, dozens of them. Bronze and marble figures, arms broken off, faces half worn away by 2,000 years of salt water, lying in the dark exactly where they had fallen when the ship carrying them went down. That ship had been huge. A Roman-era cargo ship, sunk sometime in the 1st century BC, loaded with expensive goods almost certainly headed for Italy. Statues, glassware, jewelry, coins, furniture, the kind of haul a rich Roman would pay a fortune for. Over the next year, with the help of the Greek government and the navy, Kontos and his men went back to strip the wreck. It nearly ended them. This was diving at the very edge of what the human body could survive. The divers were going down to 150 feet in gear that gave them no real safety from the pressure. One diver never came back up. 2 more were left unable to move by what we now call the bends. Men were crippled for life hauling marble arms and bronze heads out of the mud. And in the middle of all of it, almost without thinking, they brought up a few plain lumps of rusted bronze and dumped them with the rest of the finds. Nobody looked twice. Understand who these men were because it makes what happened next stranger. Sponge divers were the hardest workers in the Aegean and among the shortest lived. They went down in canvas and copper, weighed down with lead, breathing whatever an air pump on the surface could push through a hose. They knew nothing about how to come up safely. They came up too fast because that was how the work was done, and those who survived it were often broken by their 40s. These were not scientists. They were workers pushed to the very edge of staying alive. And it was their hands, not any experts, that pulled the most advanced object of the ancient world out of the mud. The statues went to the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. The experts there were thrilled, and rightly so. One of the finds was a life-sized bronze figure of a young man, later called the Antikythera Youth, one of the best bronze statues to survive from ancient times. There were marble figures, fragile glass cups, gold jewelry, coins. This was the story. This was what mattered. The lumps of green metal sat in a storeroom, cracking as they dried out, ignored for months. Then, on the 17th of May, 1902, a scientist named Valerios Stais was looking over the finds when one of those rusted chunks caught his eye. As it had dried, it had split open, and inside the crack, set into the bronze, was a gear wheel, an exact, carefully cut gear with teeth sitting inside a thing that was 2,000 years old. This should have been the moment everything changed. It wasn't, because when Stais showed people what he had found, most of them refused to accept it. A gear, cut into bronze, from the age of the Roman Republic. It made no sense. The common belief was simple and comfortable. The ancient Greeks did not have machines like this. Everyone knew that. So the thing had to be something else, maybe an astrolabe, maybe a tool for sailing, or, the doubters argued, maybe it wasn't ancient at all. Maybe it had fallen into the wreck site centuries later and only looked like it belonged with the statues. For half a century, that is roughly where the matter sat. The pieces were listed, labeled, and mostly left alone. A thing that clearly should not exist is easier to put away than to explain, and this is the part almost nobody ever hears about. The Antikythera mechanism was not some instant hit. It was an embarrassment, a thing that sat in a drawer for 50 years because admitting it was real meant admitting we had the ancient world wrong. To feel why the thing is so hard to accept, you have to understand what the ancient world was actually supposed to be able to do. And the answer is that the Greeks were amazing star watchers, but star watchers of a very special kind. They watched, they measured, they wrote down what they saw with endless care, and they were handed many years of records from the Babylonians before them, who had been tracking the movement of the moon and the timing of eclipses for hundreds of years. From all of that, Greek thinkers like Hipparchus, working in the 2nd century BC, had figured out the hidden patterns of the sky. They knew the moon's movement was uneven. They knew eclipses came back on long, steady cycles. They understood the math of the sky at a level that would not be beaten for a very long time, but that knowledge lived on scrolls, in tables, in columns of numbers a trained star watcher could read. Turning that understanding into a real machine, a thing of locking metal wheels that would do the math for you when you turned a handle, is a completely different kind of feat. It is the difference between knowing the recipe and building the oven. Nothing in the records left behind hinted the Greeks had made that leap. There were mentions here and there of legendary machines, but no machine, no proof, just stories. Until the sea gave one back. The man who finally forced the issue was a British scientist and historian named Derek de Solla Price. In 1951, he started studying the pieces, and he could not let them go. Price understood something the history experts had missed. This was not a job for a historian with a magnifying glass, it was a job for physics. You could not understand the thing by looking at its surface because the surface was ruined. Everything that mattered was locked inside the rusted bronze, in layers, out of sight. So in the early 1970s, Price did something nobody had tried. Working with a Greek X-ray expert named Charalambos Karakalos, he took X-ray and gamma-ray images of the pieces. For the first time, he could see through the rust into the thing itself, and what the images showed was stunning. This was not one gear. It was a system of them. Locking wheels, set inside each other, some with dozens of teeth, lined up in trains that locked together with a pattern that was clearly built on math. Price started counting teeth, and when he did, the numbers began to speak. One large gear had exactly 223 teeth. Others locked into number patterns that matched the movement of the sun and the moon. In 1974, he shared his findings in a paper called Gears from the Greeks. His answer was as clear as it was chilling. This was a machine that did math. A machine built to map the sky. What the ancient Greeks had built, and what had then been lost, was a computer. Not a computer in the sense of a screen and a keyboard, a mechanical one, a computer made of gears. You turned a handle, and the gears did the math for you, right there in metal, turning a date you set into an answer showing where the sun, the moon, and the stars would sit in the sky. But even Price, with his X-rays, could only see so far. The rust still hid most of the detail. His model was brilliant and it was unfinished, and the thing kept most of its secrets for another 30 years. If you are already leaning in, wondering how any of this was possible, subscribe now, because what the next scan showed is the exact moment the impossible stopped being just an idea and became a fact you can read in the metal. You will not want to miss it. Then, in 2005, the machines caught up with the mystery. A team led by Tony Freeth and the star scientist Mike Edmonds at Cardiff University gathered what they needed to do what Price never could. They brought in a company called X-Tech Systems, who built a special X-ray scanner just for this job. It weighed about 8 tons. It was a fine-focus CT scanner, the same basic tool as a hospital CT, but built to see through solid metal and rebuild the inside of the pieces in 3 dimensions, layer by tiny layer. They wheeled that 8-ton machine into the museum in Athens and aimed it at the bronze. And for the first time in 2,000 years, the inside of the Antikythera mechanism could be seen. Every gear, every tooth. Where Price had only been able to guess at maybe 24 wheels, the CT scans clearly showed how many gears were left. More than 30 separate gears, packed into a case no bigger than a thick book, and signs that the whole machine had once held even more, now lost to the sea. A second team, from the tech company Hewlett-Packard, brought a different tool. They used a method that takes photos of a surface under light from dozens of angles, then puts the images together to show detail you can't see with your eyes, letting faint scratches and worn carvings leap out of the metal. And what both teams found together was the thing Price had never been able to read: text. The surface of the machine and the layers just beneath it were covered in Greek writing. Tiny letters, some barely more than a millimeter tall, packed across the plates and dials. Thousands of letters, and the team was in time able to read a big part of them. It was a how-to guide, cut into the metal itself, telling what the machine showed and how it worked. The scans let people read words that no human eye had seen since the thing went into the water. And what those words, and those gears, showed is the thing that should not be possible. Here is what the Antikythera machine actually did. On its front face was a large round dial. Turn the hand crank on the side, and a set of pointers moved across it, showing the place of the sun and the moon against the background of the zodiac and against an Egyptian calendar of 365 days. That alone would be amazing for the ancient world. It was the least of it. The moon pointer did something amazing. Anyone who watches the night sky knows the moon does not move at a steady pace. It speeds up and slows down as it moves along its path. The Greek star watcher Hipparchus had worked out the math of this uneven movement, and whoever built the Antikythera machine had turned that idea into bronze. They used a pin and slot trick, one gear set a little off-center on another so that as they turned, the pointer sped up and slowed down, copying the real movement of the real moon. Stop and think about what that took. The builder did not just know that the moon sped up and slowed down, they had to turn that fact about the sky into a real, moving trick. One gear riding a little off the center of another so that the metal itself would speed up and slow down by exactly the right amount. It is an answer a modern engineer would be proud of, and it is a piece of work so clever that it would not be seen again in the records for well over 1,000 years. Turn the machine over, and the back was where its real job lived. 2 large spiral dials. The upper one tracked a 19-year sky cycle known to the Greeks, 235 moon months laid out along a spiral track, a way of keeping the moon calendar and the sun year in step. The lower dial did something that would have looked like seeing the future. It told when eclipses would come. It ran on a 223-month cycle, and around its spiral were little markers, small symbols, telling the person using it when a sun or moon eclipse was coming, and even in some cases, what color the moon might look and which way the wind might blow. Think about what that means. In the ancient world, an eclipse was terror. Armies stopped fighting. Kings feared the gods had turned against them. A sky that went dark in the middle of the day could end a battle or bring down a ruler. And here was a box, 2,000 years ago, that let a person turn a crank and be told, calmly, ahead of time, that in a certain month, years in the future, the moon would go dark. It took the single most frightening event in the sky and turned it into a line on a dial. That is not just clever work, it is a kind of power. And there was more. In 2008, the team reading the newly read writing found something nobody expected on a small side dial. It tracked a 4-year cycle and named the Panhellenic Games, the great sports festivals of the Greek world, Olympia, Nemea, Isthmia, and the others, including the ancient Olympics. A machine built to map the sky also kept track of when the world would come together to compete. The exact list of games gave the team a clue about where it might have come from, pointing toward the Corinth part of the Greek world rather than Athens. The machine was not only a sky tool, it was a calendar of a whole people, its skies and its festivals tied together in bronze. And there are strong signs it went further still. Writing on the front cover, read from the scans, describes a display of the 5 planets known back then: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. The writing lists them, tells how they move, and tells of marker beads showing where each one sat, which means the front of the machine almost certainly held a full model of the known solar system, the planets drifting across the dial in their looping, uneven paths. Here is the problem. The gears that would have moved those planets are mostly gone, lost to rust or spread across the seafloor, so for many years no one could prove how it had been done or whether it was even possible with the space and the parts they had. Then, in 2021, a team at University College London, including some of the same people who had spent their lives on this thing, shared a full computer rebuild of the front display. They showed that the planet movements written on the metal could be made by a stacked set of gears that would fit inside the case, matching the parts that were left. A working model of the whole sky, the sun, the moon, and all 5 planets you can see moving in their real, uneven dance, turned by a single handle, in bronze, before the birth of Christ. And it is worth stopping on how the thing was actually made, because that is its own quiet horror. There were no machine tools, no spinning tool run by a motor, no cutting machine of the kind that would let a clockmaker in the 18th century stamp out matching gears. Every one of those wheels was cut by hand. Someone marked out the teeth on a disc of bronze, splitting the circle into exact parts, and then filed each tooth one by one after another, some gears carrying more than 200 teeth around their rim. And they did it exactly enough that the trains still lock, still turn, still give answers that match the real sky. The fit is so exact that a modern engineer, told to copy it with hand tools alone, would sweat. It was made by a craftsman who understood both the math of the sky and the hands-on art of cutting metal, in the same head, at the same time, more than a century before the Roman Empire existed. Now sit with the problem that has haunted every person who has ever studied this thing. We know more or less what it did, we understand the gears. What we cannot fully explain is how it exists at all. The skill here is not a small step ahead of its time, it is a canyon. When you look at the records left of ancient tech, there is nothing between the Antikythera machine and everything else. No simpler early models, no half-built earlier tries leading up to it, no rougher machines that came after and slowly got better. It shows up in the records fully finished, at a level of gear work that then disappears completely. And after it disappears, the silence lasts for more than 1,000 years. Geared machines this advanced do not appear again anywhere on Earth until the sky clocks of the Middle Ages in Europe, built in the 14th century AD by men like Richard of Wallingford and Giovanni da Dondi. 1,400 years. That is the gap. 1,400 years between this thing and the next thing humans built that could match it. Try to picture what fits inside that stretch of time. The Roman Empire was still growing when the machine sank. That empire would rise to its full height, rule the Western world for hundreds of years, and then rot and fall apart completely, and still, no one built its match. The libraries of the ancient world burned. Whole areas of knowledge were scattered and forgotten. Europe fell into the long stretch we call the Dark Ages, and the skill to build a geared model of the sky was not passed down, not found again, not even remembered as something that had once been possible. The knowledge of how to cut those gears, how to stack those trains, how to turn the movement of the sky into locking bronze was simply gone. Not hidden, not locked away, wiped out, so completely that when experts first saw the pieces, their honest response was that it could not possibly be real. A people built something, and then the world forgot not only how to make it, but that it had ever been made at all. That is not a gap in a timeline. That is a wound. That is the true weight of the Antikythera machine. It is not that it is strange, it is that it is proof of something we lost and did not even know we had. It raises a hard question. If a machine this advanced could be built, used, loaded onto a ship, and then wiped from human memory so completely that it took a special 8-ton scanner 2,000 years later to prove it ever worked, then how much else did the ancient world know that simply sank and rotted and was forgotten? So who built it? The honest answer is that we do not know for sure, and that not knowing is part of what makes the thing so unsettling. There are clues. The games named on its dials point toward the Greek-speaking world, with some experts seeing a link to Corinth and its colonies, and others to the island of Rhodes, which was a great center for star study and home to the thinker Posidonius, who was known to have built a machine that mapped the sky. Some trace the line of thinking further back, to the work of Archimedes himself, who according to Roman writers had built bronze globes that copied the movement of the sun, moon, and planets. And here is the detail that turns the whole thing from a strange find into something truly haunting. We have written proof that machines like this existed. The Roman leader Cicero, writing in the 1st century BC, in the very time the ship went down, described a bronze machine built by Archimedes that mapped the movements of the sun, the moon, and the planets, a machine that had been carried back to Rome as a prize of war. Cicero also wrote about a similar machine built by the thinker Posidonius on the island of Rhodes, a machine that copied the movement of the sky. For hundreds of years, experts read those lines and figured they were blown up. Ancient writers loved to puff up a good story. There was no way the Greeks had actually built such things. The Antikythera machine is the proof that Cicero was telling the truth. It means this thing was not a one-time wonder. It was one survivor of a whole group of machines, written about in the records, built by named masters, that we simply did not believe were real until one of them washed up in a fishing net 2,000 years later. But no name is stamped in this piece of metal. No workshop signed it. We have one real survivor of what must have been a whole line of tool-making, a line with masters and students and years of built-up skill, and every trace of that line except this single rusted box has disappeared. The Antikythera machine is not the beginning of a story. It is the only surviving page of one, torn out and dropped into the sea, and everything around it, everything that would explain it, is gone. And the wreck itself has not finished giving up its secrets. In the last 10 years, a new wave of experts has gone back to that same patch of seafloor off Antikythera, this time with trained divers, robot gear, and modern cameras. They have brought up more statue pieces, bronze and marble bits, rich goods the sponge divers missed. In 2016, they even pulled up human bones from the wreck, the bones of someone who went down with the ship 2,000 years ago, kept safe in the mud. Every trip raises the same quiet, uneasy question. If a machine that rewrote the history of tech was sitting in that field of wreckage, ignored for 50 years, then what else is still down there in that wreck and in the thousands of others spread across the floor of the Mediterranean waiting? The ship that carried it went down in the 1st century BC, its load of stolen or bought treasures spread across the seafloor, and the most advanced thing humans had ever made sank into the dark with the rest of the rich goods, worth no more in that moment than a bronze statue or a set of dining couches. For 2,000 years it lay there, quietly holding a level of knowledge the world would forget it ever had. And it was found by accident, by frightened sponge divers who thought they had swum into a graveyard. They were not totally wrong. It was a graveyard, not of people but of a whole lost chapter of what humans once knew how to do. So here is what I want to know from you. Knowing that the Antikythera machine is real, that it worked, and that whatever line of makers built it was wiped out so completely we cannot even name its maker, which unsettles you more? The idea that the ancient world was able to do things we still cannot fully rebuild? Or the thought of how much other lost knowledge is still down there, buried in wrecks and ruins we have not found, waiting 2,000 years for someone to drop into the dark by accident and see it? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone, and if this thing got under your skin, wait until you see what divers pulled out of another shipwreck that experts still argue was thousands of years ahead of its time. That video is on screen right now. Click it before you talk yourself out of what you just learned.